What's up, everybody? Matt Aguilar here, and welcome to Comic Book Nation's The Pull List, where we talk about all things comics all the time. I've got an amazing group of comic experts with me today. Of course, the amazing Kofi Outlaw.
Ready to pull from this list.
And welcome me back to the show, Jamie Lovett.
I don't really know how to follow that introduction. I am also ready to pull things from a list.
Fair enough. By the way, speaking of lists that are pulled, you should also check out Jamie's wonderful weekly column, The Weekly Pull, on Comicbook.com, where he gets a number of recommendations and everything for the week moving forward from our comic book crew. So definitely check that out every single week, as well as the pull list. We're just one big happy comics family here. We got a lot of, I feel like I say this every week, but it's extremely true. We have a lot of comics to get through, and not everything made this list. Just because the sheer amount of things that are out there. But we've got a unique mix of everything this week, and we're going to start with The Amazing Spider-Man number 44, which is the conclusion to Gang War. It's a series. I think it's actually the first Spider-Man series kind of in the current run that we've really been following here. It does ironically come back to back off of the second issue of Ultimate Spider-Man last week, so I know our bar's a little high because we were all pretty jazzed about that. But I thought this wrapped up the story in a satisfying, if not unsurprising way. There were some teases of like it, kind of like it won't end the way you expect, and then it was like, yeah, okay, kind of ended the way I expect. That's not bad. I enjoyed it, and I really like where the kind of the reinforcements came from in this book. Again, we're going to get into light spoilers, but I won't spoil everything outright for you. But some of the twists that set up things moving forward weren't like jaw dropping to me, but they're satisfying, and I'm excited to see those stories moved further. But Jamie, joining the show here, we didn't actually get a chance to hear you weigh in on Ultimate Spider-Man. So how do you think kind of this compares in a back-to-back week, and what did you think of Gang War overall?
I mean, I feel like they're two very different books. Ultimate Spider-Man is very actually focused on Peter and Spider-Man. This felt like more, it's not really a Spider-Man story. Like, Spider-Man doesn't really change in any way here. This is really more of a Tombstone story. It's about his character and his arc and his daughter. So it feels like apples and oranges a little bit. I definitely prefer Ultimate Spider-Man. I think it's a little, as much as I've enjoyed this Zeb Wells run of Amazing, the Jonathan Hickman, what he's doing on Ultimate Spider-Man feels so different from anything we've seen in Spider-Man for a long time. Whereas this feels like, I know they build it as an event, but it could have just kind of been the next arc of whatever Spider-Man was doing at the time,
Now, I'm curious, did you read any of the tie-in series that went with it, or did you just stick to the main through line?
I've just been reading the Amazing Spider-Man stuff.
Okay.
None of the other Gang War titles had hooks that really drew me into them.
Gotcha. For me, I will say that I ended up reading, I didn't read all of them, but I read probably about half of those kind of tie-in books. And I thought in a lot of cases, they did a really good job of kind of investing me more into the conflict. You're seeing different, boroughs, right? You're seeing different neighborhoods and stuff being defended, and you're getting more of an idea of like who runs that area and how the hero plays into it. So then seeing everybody come back in this one was fun. It was like, oh, okay, we got the whole group is against the whole group. And maybe it is a little first take of me to throw Ultimate Spider-Man in there, because I didn't really mean any shade. It's just kind of hard when like one week to the next you have two Spider-Man books, and they're just, number one, they are very different, but number two, it's just kind of hard not to compare. But that's probably on me. Kofi, what did you think of this? Am I completely off base in even bringing up one to compare to the other? Is that bad on me?
No, I mean, we've been talking about, Spider-Man having this big revival everywhere, it seems, but on the comic page where it's been very hard for us to kind of connect with him. And me, I think there's two different types of camps these days. I've been I'm not one of the people who's into the kind of whole mystical Spider-Verse totems, all of that stuff really missed me. What I thought was fun about Gang War in the beginning was going back to kind of like the 1970s Spider-Man, who was very much a street hero, handling street problems. And even though they were like, they're now like a cheesy Dick Tracy gallery, having all these different gangsters like a Silvermane, Tombstone, Hammerhead. It was funny how quick those names came back to me when I started reading this and was like, oh yeah, these are fun characters. So in Spider-Man, there was sometimes it always is a large ensemble of characters that it kind of has, it goes in and out of. Sometimes we're following Peter through these very focused stories, and sometimes, we're following Robbie and Jonah and the gangsters and, Ned Leeds and Betty Brant and how that all goes with the Green Goblin, Hobgoblin mysteries. You need all these cast of characters. So I didn't mind that. I liked the beginning. This was very much a gangster story. There was some really dark stuff with the Madam Mask dragging people into basements and whatnot and beating them up. We finish in just a typical comic book fight. And there's really nothing to this book, in all due respect to it, except like the art of John Romita Jr. doing just a huge comic booky battle scene slugfest and just having fun with it. And I had fun with it in that, just watching the artwork, seeing all the different characters jumping in and scrapping, Spider-Boy coming in and
Spider-Boy,
and trying to talk to Jackpot and all this, and seeing Count Nefaria and like Silverman. Like, these are people I haven't cared about in very long, and just seeing this, it was fun. But there was no way this was ever going to wrap up except for a gang war in an actual fight. And in the end, the person who was the real protagonist, as Jamie points out, Tombstone, is the person who kind of like that the arc really ends for, of Tombstone coming back from this like reluctant, I don't want to be a gangster anymore, to being like, all right, I got to be the gangster, and doing that whole thing. And it's interesting, and it sets up an interesting dynamic for the underworld and Tombstone as Spider-Man. And I'm with you. I read some of the tie-ins. I read Luke Cage, and I think I read Daredevil, the Elektra stuff. And I liked all those. So, like, I liked those tie-ins. Those were good when you got to the focused heroes and their kind of individual missions. And so this will be a good graphic novel or big trade if people want to read it, and you get to read all the tie-ins, because there are all these characters in the pieces, and seeing them come together like this, you kind of do need all the pieces to see where they've all been and the parts of New York they physically fought over and why, and everybody's motivation and coming into this. Because, I mean, there's very little of Tombstone's daughter in this, right? Like, and
right.
And so, who was the other kind of central character in this. So, yeah, I mean, this is just a big, fun slugfest. It's got some great John Romita art, just doing what he does with big, blocky characters blocking each other in the face. And I enjoyed it for that. But I didn't get any major... Yeah, there's no major depth at it. Tombstone's a badass by the end of this, and it's like, cool. He's a cool gangster character.
I was actually
go ahead, Jamie.
Sorry, I was just... Could you follow what Shotgun's deal was?
No.
Because he said he was embedded there, and like the big twist is he was there to deal with Beetle and not Tombstone, but Beetle didn't become like a crime lord until this event after he was already there. So I'm very confused about what that timeline actually looks like. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me.
Yeah, Shotgun was confusing. I also, although I have to say, this is the best sell of a spinoff, because this retroactive.
Oh my God, I was gonna bring them up. Are you gonna bring
yeah, I need to go back now and read the Shang-Chi and Iron Fist, like that whole thing, and being like, what happened there? Because Danny is pretty pissed by the end of this. He's like, we're fighting tanks, bro. And he's like, nobody notices.
She-Hulk, where did you go? I got tired of fighting tanks.
Yeah, I love that she's like, I got bored. I had to go find something else.
Yeah, so there's
I
there's
thought
a lot
that
of
was
good
great
comedy in this issue, and like there's some funny things, and it is a pretty good sell to make you be like, yeah, what did happen with all this, and like some of these other stories I want to go see. Like, I definitely want to see that arc to tie-in arc now. So, I mean, good sell on their part.
Yeah, we've had a couple, people in the comments like really looking forward to the trade, and I think ultimately this will be a really fun and more rewarding read in trade, unless you picked up all those, because I do think you speak of Luke Cage is a big one, so that when he comes in, like, that impact is felt more if you've read and you're like, oh, he's making his way here. Spider-Woman's been dealing with Hydra over in that series, and that's why like the meeting between like her and like there's other stuff here that makes this a more fulfilling finale for me. And also some of the Beetle stuff has been dealt with in some of the other books. But really, I read that and went, okay, if you'll give me this Iron Fist, Shang-Chi like team up, I'm in all day, because he's just like, no one even saw us. Like that whole dialogue had me rolling. That was great. So that's part of the fun of these Spider-Man events, because Spider-Man has a fun supporting cast of heroes and villains that don't get used a lot, just because he's blessed with a very iconic rogues gallery of heavyweights. So some of these other characters don't get used as much. So that's been part of what I've enjoyed most about Gang Wars, that we got to see some of these people, including Tombstone, really get some shine. So, all right, well, let's move into a much different book, The Penguin, number 7. We've been following this along, and every single time I go, okay, you know what? I don't need to give the spotlight to The Penguin again, because like there's other books, like it's not because I don't like it, but it's like there's other books I should probably give a spotlight to. Then The Penguin goes and like does an issue where I'm like glued from beginning to end. I'm like, God dang it. I cannot talk about this book. And this book essentially, I won't get into spoilers of like how and what exactly leads to that, but really shows kind of why Oswald adopts the Penguin name and gives its take on where that comes from, the meaning behind it, what it was, supposed to be, and how that, ends up kind of spinning out of control, and how maybe that relationship with him and Batman is maybe even still there in a way. Like it puts a lot of questions out in the atmosphere. And I mean, I've been a huge fan of this series and what it's been doing for the character. And this was another one where like, I was already glued just because I enjoy following Oswald's, kind of unexpectedly brutal, but also interesting kind of just movement through being a crime boss. But then this goes and just puts a different angle on the Batman dynamic, and I just really enjoyed this. Kofi, I know we've been following this for a minute. What did you think of this issue and how it kind of pushes that forward, or does it for you?
I mean, I actually find this series more and more like really captivating and intriguing the more I read it. Every issue feels very different. Like each chapter feels like a self-contained story in and of itself, and very different. Even though this is Unimportant Man Part 2, it's very different than Part 1. And like I like that what Tom King is doing is really reinventing our understanding of Penguin and what Penguin does and how Penguin's mind works, but at the same time kind of really showcasing the psychosis of Penguin. And like there's a lot of dramatic irony in just watching this man do things that, even we get in this, that Batman is saying like, I know this man is like a sociopath and he's playing me, but you don't even know who's playing who quite, who's got the upper hand on who has the higher perspective on things and the greater knowledge of like what's going on. And this issue does some very, very funny things with that, like you said, the whole Batman Penguin dynamic and like what it is and how it functions, and just blurring those lines into this complex relationship, and Penguin quietly making Penguin like one of the most complex villains that Batman has to face. And why he's stuck around for so long, and how he's done all these things and maintained when he's seemingly this little funny looking man. And it's just a crime world that you want to talk about differences between like Gang War, which is a very comic booky kind of crime story, and which is like a very serious noir crime story that I'd be like, if I'm Colin Farrell, I'm like dipping into this, like looking and being like, and like taking a few cliff notes about like what makes this guy intriguing. Is every scene like it's just doing the trick of making me more interested in Oswald Cobblepot the Penguin than I ever had a right to be for basically every scene. Like him just in a bathtub talking to his ex-wife, or his wife at the time, I forget what time period we're in, and just going over like, the moment of doubt he's having, like, what is it about me? And she's like, oh, like, I never got this question. And just having that conversation, which could be exposition somewhere else, is very intriguing. And then you get like a good kind of perspective answer out of it, which is just, the Penguin is just his appetites. He's just always after that next thing he's hungering for and doesn't care about it. And just how we get characters coming back in, like how he met the Help, and how this story is kind of coming back on itself. And you get more of that after that fantastic issue we love where he just goes back to recruit the Help, and then like all of that. And then what you get at the end of this issue, which then again throws open a lot of intrigue about, okay, now I need to know like more and I need to see more of this issue. And in all of this layering we're doing down, we're still at the top layer where Batman and the Penguin in present day action are in this really crazy situation together where it doesn't look very good. And what are we going to think by the time we get back there? And like, what's our perspective now going to be? And so, yeah, this continues to be more interesting than it has any right to be. And that's what I just always angrily just say every time I have a great time, like reading one of these issues. I'm like, man, it's better than
book makes him so angry. It makes him so angry. Jamie, I think the last time you were on, we actually talked Penguin too. I think it's becoming a tradition. I cannot remember. Was that the case? Did I also stick Penguin on you?
I think you may have, because I didn't read this issue because I basically forgot this series existed. I feel like the only time I ever remember it exists is when you guys talk about it.
Yeah, that's about right.
I mean, just remind me who the artist on this book is, because I'm just looking at these pages and these are some really gorgeous, like really nice pages with a lot of really cool like shadows and really gets that noir effect that I'm guessing they were going for. Okay, yeah.
Steven Subic.
Subic. It's got a really nice look to it. I assume they were going for like a very dark noir look, especially in the aftermath of the Penguin being in the Batman, with how like dark and gritty that was. But yeah, it's a really gorgeous. I'm gonna have to go back and get caught up on it now, because you guys are selling it very well, and those pages are really gorgeous.
Yeah, and Marcelo Maiolo, who I'm actually a big fan of his work on some other books I read. That they make quite the team. I gotta say, that is one thing that I probably haven't highlighted enough, is how visually impressive this book is. It just nails, like, it's funny, like even on the page, which I can't say what happens on this page that I'm looking at, but there's a page really early on that kind of sets the tone for the rest of the issue, and like that page just had me doing a double take of like, wait, is that what I think it is? And like I was like, oh, like he's, that person's not alive. Like it had me questioning things, but the art style just goes so perfectly if like on the subject matter. It does such a good job of maximizing those things. So yeah, I'm incredibly excited. I'm glad we're doing our job of selling this book. I'm gonna move into something else real quick. The Radiant Black, if you've been paying attention to the Massiverse, which is now has grown to be like an army of incredible books that are kind of telling different stories all throughout this universe. But Radiant Black started it all. And right now the Catalyst War is happening, and it's doing something really unique. So there was a vote about which protagonist, because this book really follows kind of two friends, should be the Radiant Black moving forward. There only one could. It ended up being where things happened where both people were sharing this power, but only one can actually share it. And now there's this, grand invasion, and there's this like these amount of trials that whoever ends up holding this power has to go through. And so right now the book is actually, there's two different issues that come out every week. So like this week it's 28 and 28.5, and 28 follows Marshall and 28.5 follows Nathan, and they're kind of their differing perspectives. But it kind of started out that way, but now it's like they're actually essentially almost on like completely different timelines. Like different people are dead in one person's journey that aren't in another. Certain events play out the same way, but then the person that is in the middle of it affects them. And so we're not really sure right now how all of this is going to kind of tie together, but it has kind of been said that it will. So it's not just like, choose your own adventure type thing of like, oh, I'll just follow this person's story. All of them are going to be important at some point and tie together. But right now it's kind of like if you are behind one hero in particular, which I tend to be Nathan, I'm kind of, not team Nathan, they're not adversaries, but I kind of am. And so 28.5 just like man, it was an amazing issue. It kind of left me punched in the gut, but in kind of all the right ways. That story is just doing something special. But then over in Marshall's story, you're still getting a lot of important context and seeing how he reacts to things. And so it's really interesting what they're doing. The stories themselves and the world they've built is incredibly impressive on its own, but this is just so unique in how it's spinning out this really kind of grand saga. I'm really enjoying it. And I think for people who want to dive into the Massiverse books, you know, you're going to have to go back a couple issues to kind of find a solid jumping on point. But I think it's worth it. And right now they're doing something really cool. So is anyone else reading the Massiverse books over yonder in the studio right now, or no? Am I the only one right now?
I haven't. I started reading Radiant Black, and then like I got busy, missed a couple issues, and by the time I came back, it felt like there were 4 spinoffs, and I needed a reading order to get caught up. So now it's on the like long list of like comic book homework. I'm going to definitely get around to eventually, but have not like really cracked back into yet.
Yeah, I'm the same way. It felt like, because you started it up and early on, you got me to start like reading it, and I started it, and I remember getting into the lore, and then I kind of fell off. By the time I looked again, I was like, oh man, how did this One Piece on me all so quickly? I was like, I feel like we are everywhere. I just tried to jump back into these two, and I was like, it was pretty daunting. So I need to go back and like, I really do need to like read the bulk of it, because they have built out like an entire universe here. So it's kind of deep in lore. So
yeah, it's impressive. Definitely worth it. And all the, you know, now most of it's cataloged in trade, right? Even if you just follow the main series, even if you just follow Radiant Black, it's been such a rewarding experience to this point. And then if you want to get into some of the other ones, you absolutely can, because they do all cross over and they are in the same world. Rogue Sun, Dead Lucky, No One, you know, Inferno Girl Red is coming, right? Or has actually already hit on Kickstarter, and like the next chapter's coming. So like they're continually building out this world, but it's just the core series itself. Easy recommend. All right, let's move into some rapid fire, since there was a lot of things to get to. I read the Women of Marvel #1 kind of special one shot. I will say it makes the best first impression for me. Did anyone else read this book, by the way?
I did. I went and read it when you mentioned that you were going to talk about it, so I gave it a shot.
So let me know if you agree with me. I think the first story was, I think, my favorite of the entire issue, but it's because of how like self-referential and breaking the fourth wall it was. I think it just, you know, it had fun with the concept of this thing we've seen in comics time and time again, right? Someone who has this kind of impressive power thinks like, oh, let me just go affect the world and change it in my image, and they just point out like the stupidity in that, and also the short-sightedness in that, and it's essentially like someone picking out, you know, all these you know, women through time, and it's all these iconic characters, you know, from Marvel history, you know, Invisible Woman, Aunt May, and that kind of thing. And then like all the conversations that happen throughout, and then there's kind of this big battle. But like, I just thought how it genuinely made me laugh multiple times. And I love books that kind of will do that, in stories that, you know, are speaking to the audience as much as they are kind of telling a story. I thought it was really fun. I thought it was a great opener, and I thought it was my favorite issue of the one shot. What did you think of that one? And did something else kind of take you?
I mean, two of the stories stood out to me. The first is the first one you're talking about. It's written by Gail Simone, and it is a very Gail Simone story, which I enjoyed. Like it rang true in this version. There's a reason she wrote Deadpool for a while. Like she's good at this, like meta commentary. I mean, she was a critic before she was a writer, and it shows. I legitimately laughed at like the it's not a what if gag, and laugh.
That's not even around yet. I love that line. That's so
right.
Good.
The X-Men creeping on Jean Grey thing, because if you ever go back and look at those Silver Age X-Men books, they absolutely are creeping on Jean Grey, and it's real weird. So yeah, I thought that was a lot of fun. I mean, I want to call it. I mean, it was a nice, funny little, you know, story. That almost sounds demeaning, but like I feel like that's what it wanted to be. Like it wasn't trying to be anything grand. I kind of hope what was his name? The Mitigator?
Yeah, the mitigator.
I hope they come back because I feel like they can be a fun recurring character. But yeah, it was good. It was a good time. The other story that stood out to me, which was the last one, and that one mostly stood out to me because it feels like that one got greenlit before the receipts for Madam Web came in. Because like why else why else would you use Madam Web to apparently set up whatever the next phase of all these characters are, assuming that's what it is.
Right.
Given that the front of the book says that like, oh, Rogue and Kate Pryde are going to be leading X-Men teams later this year, I feel like those are probably glimpses at what that's going to look like. Plus there was like Jackpot and Black Cat, who have a series coming up here in like a couple weeks, I think. So I feel like those are like actual glimpses at things that are coming up. But yeah, just that one felt more like a advertisement for future comics than an actual story in itself. And very weird that they use Madam Web to set that up.
I will say, number one, Kofi mentioned it earlier. I'm a huge fan of like the Ezekiel, the Spider Totems side of the Spider-Verse. Madam Web did me no favors. Because I will like, crap! Like, why do we have to do it that way? So
now
it
you
isn't.
See how silly it is. Now you see.
No, it's not. It's great.
I want to open your eyes like Bird Box and make you stare at it. Just look at how silly it is.
Also, if you want a good, Madam Web has actually been being used in the Spider-Woman series quite well. She's kind of a main supporting character in that, in helping Jessica, like, actually, like, they've been playing off the stuff that's actually happened in the Spider-Verse books, with, and for Jessica, it means like, losing someone very close to her and her son. So like they've been tying all that in. And so she actually has a purpose in that series and been using well. So if you do want to find more Madam Web stuff, you should actually go read that. But yeah, I agree with you. This felt like kind of a tie in there. Kofi, I know you jumped into some of the X books, Resurrection of Magneto and Dead X-Men had new things this week. What'd you think?
First of all, it's crazy to think that Marvel has Destiny and Madam Web, and one of those characters is significantly better than the other. So Dead X-Men continues to be interesting. I didn't love the artwork of this book. It had multiple artists on it. It was kind of all over the place in styles, but I do like that they're this book is cleaning up this whole House and Powers of 10 storyline about Moira and the lives that she lived. It's getting a little too heady for me because now we've gotten to the part in the sandwich where X-Men is now talking about affecting timelines that were past life timelines that don't technically exist anymore. But if we change them, we can somehow mess up everything. So we're getting real heady with the timey-wimey of this. It's beginning to eat itself because, we're already talking about canceled timelines because the whole Moira life thing was always this tricky little thing to explain. Okay, so what did those lives mean? What happened to everything in them? And like, where do those things go? Is a big weird thing. And now we're hopping through it and trying not to mess up those because now it just feels like the whole Krakoa thing is just going up in the air and it's all going to get erased by the end of this. But the most interesting about this book is the collection of characters that they have. And like this book doesn't shy away from the fact that the most interesting thing is the interactions and conversations between these characters. It's this random group of X-Men thrown together that nobody would be picking for their draft list, but like it's interesting. Dazzler, Jubilee, Prodigy, Frenzy, like seeing them work together and do things is crazy. I wish the artwork was a little more dynamic because the one thing this book introduced, that's crazy cyborg Moira and her crazy axe that's now just cutting through reality and murdering people like something out of Rick and Morty is pretty interesting. And so I just wish we had better visualization of that. But I'm kind of interested in how Dead X-Men and what this title, because this is a very heavy title. So like, where does this all come into play and where does this converge? I was much more high up on Resurrection of Magneto. I said that the first one was a little thick for me. I mean, it was such a kind of weird entry point to be like a complete Storm, like referendum on Storm, which I feel like who's our writer here? Al Ewing. Yeah, I've been saying Al Ewing has like a very serious Storm complex, followed only very closely by his whole Magneto complex, which is kind of like it's been pretty nuts. But I liked this issue because the first issue did the same thing for Storm that this issue did, but I liked the kind of the focus, and I felt like this. Well, Storm is somebody nobody can really get a handle around, and so there's just all these bits and pieces that writers keep trying to grab at and form into something. Magneto feels like Al Ewing has a very good view of Magneto and the complexity of his character, and this was a much more focused story and kind of self-contained story. And everything from the implication of the list of names of the walls and all the levels that hits to how he measures it to how we get to the end of this issue and how Storm kind of transforms that and brings back Magneto, I thought was really, really, really well done. Like, this is up there with some of the best of why I like X-Men Red, and that whole, the death of Magneto, like that whole thing was so badass. And so like he loves his character and he really understands the complexity of who Magneto is. And this issue is like a really good referendum. If somebody was like, who is Magneto? I'd be like, this is going to be a little weird, but read this. Like, this kind of explains it. And there's just so many callbacks to things you like forgot about. Like, yeah, how many people Magneto's murdered or inspired the murder of, you know, and then by the end, you know, the alternative to that and just why he has motivations to always come back, and even his bond with Charles and all of that. And so, yeah, complex character handled in a very good kind of exploratory story. So now this is actually a resurrection of Magneto story, and I really liked it.
Jamie, I know you were dipping into the world of fantasy and sci-fi with some books this week. I know you read the Savage Sword of Conan and Star Trek Defiant. What did you kind of come away with those and kind of catch people up on those?
Yeah, so Savage Sword of Conan is the second book that Titan is launching since getting the Conan license after Marvel let it go after their second run with it. They've been doing a really great job in their main Conan the Barbarian book, which is funny because it has the same writer that wrote a lot of the Marvel books, but the editorial direction is just so different that it feels almost entirely different. It's really soaking up that like pulpy Bronze Age feel that made Conan popular in the first place, instead of trying to shove him into Moon Knight crossovers for some reason. So now Savage Sword of Conan is cool because if you remember old like 70s comics, Savage Sword of Conan was the big black and white magazine that they put out where they could do stuff that they couldn't get away with under the comics code because it was a magazine and not a comic. So it's big magazine format, it's black and white, and it has multiple stories, and there's a short prose story in there. I've read the Conan story. It's very, very cool. There's a Solomon Kane story in here as well, because they're trying to mix in some of the other Robert E. Howard characters. I haven't gone around reading that one yet, but it looks cool. It's drawn by Patrick Zurcher. And then there's a short Conan story by Jim Zub, who, again, doing a great job on the other Conan book. And it's just a very cool, like, complete oversized package of a thing that feels really substantial compared to a lot of the flimsier, you know, monthly releases. It's like 80 some odd pages. So it's not just like, you know, a short Solomon Kane story and a short like Conan story. These are full length things you're getting, and they're very cool to just like kick back and read if you're into that pulpy stuff. It is very pulpy. So be prepared for that. This is not a like rated G Conan or anything. So if you're into that kind of thing, this is a very good serving of that. If you want a slightly more tempered version, go check out the Conan the Barbarian series, which is also very good. So yeah, then the other book I wanted to talk about was Star Trek Defiant. If you haven't been keeping up with IDW Star Trek books, there's the flagship Star Trek book, which has kind of like the Avengers of Star Trek pulled from the various TV series. And then this is like the underside of that. It's like the Thunderbolts or Suicide Squad version of Star Trek, where Worf is leading a team of less reputable Star Trek characters, and they are doing essentially off the books missions for Starfleet. They had gone rogue with good intentions, and then when they tried to come back into the fold, Starfleet was like, yeah, maybe we want you to do some other things that we can deny we had anything to do with later. And as the book has gone on, nobody is happy with that situation. Nobody on the Defiant crew. And what's cool about this issue starts a brand new arc. And there are two things that are particularly cool about it. One is that it is picking up a like abandoned storyline from the first season of Star Trek: The Next Generation, which is that a bunch of parasites had infiltrated Starfleet Command and took them over, and had to be sussed out by Picard. But at the end of that episode, they send out a beacon implying that there's going to be more coming, and they never picked up on that. Like Star Trek Picard was going to pick up on it, and then they realized for practical reasons they could not. So instead, we get Star Trek Defiant dealing with that storyline and theoretically finally bringing some resolution to it, which is a very cool thing for longtime Star Trek fans. And then if none of that means anything to you, it's still like they're on a space station with this parasite alien outbreak happening. So it's kind of like Star Trek by way of Alien, which is not a flavor of Star Trek you get a whole lot. So it's very cool. This whole series is written by Christopher Cantwell. Angel Unzueta is coming back for this. He does a very cool, like dark, shadowy sci-fi vibe. The whole series has been great, but like if you wanted to get a sample, this would be a good issue to jump onto and get a sense of what it's all about. The whole Star Trek line right now over at IDW has been pretty excellent. But if you want something a little different than typical Star Trek, this would be the series to check out.
Wow, you just sold the hell out of that for me. We'll be checking that out. I know we got to run, so I am going to close us out on one more other big universe. We've talked a lot about the Energon universe over at Skybound and the Transformers and G.I. Joe of it all. If you're not following Duke, well, I know we kind of spotlighted Cobra Commander not crazy long ago, but Duke is kind of number one dealing with directly the kind of impact the Transformers made on Earth as soon as they got there, because Duke is tied to that from that first issue of kind of he's already lost people to them, Starscream and all that stuff. So that is directly dealt with in the Duke series, but also we're getting major G.I. Joe characters. It's on the cover, so it's not a spoiler. The Baroness is here, and the way they work her into the book and the, you know, can you trust her? Obviously you can't, but like, you know, we have a common goal type thing. Duke kind of being, you know, railroaded right now, you know, by his own government and things like all that stuff, that intrigue and spycraft stuff mixed in with kind of the traditional G.I. Joe-ness is great. I think they're doing a great job so far of making a character that I've never been like a big like Duke fan, even in the broad G.I. Joe franchise scheme of things. And this is making me a fan. And so I think that's a huge credit to it. So definitely check that out. It's only on issue 3, so you can, you know, start just a couple issues back and jump on board. And I think you should. So that will do it for the pull list. We covered a lot of comics. We will cover more, of course, next week. We love to hear your feedback. Until next week, enjoy comics. And thank you to Kofi and Jamie for jumping in on this with me. We will see you soon. Peace.
Peace.
Deuces.